Welcome to another episode of the Teen Junction podcast. I'm your host, Cindy Poluta. If you're new here, you are now part of our community. What is this podcast about? It's for parents or caregivers of teenagers, adolescents, those humans from the age of 11 to 25 navigating life. There's no handbook for parenting. Now, I always say that we're all parenting for the first time. There's no right or wrong way because every child is unique and every parent-child relationship is unique. But hopefully something from today's episode will stick with you and help with your child. Today's topic is quite a heavy one. It's something that we need to address. So we came through COVID, which was a very difficult and tough time. And what COVID did, though we all hated it, was it shone a spotlight on mental health and wellness. And now we're more aware of those around us and in particular our children. And not to say that COVID affected their mental state, but it's allowed us to open the conversation to people's feelings. So today, on this podcast episode, I've got phenomenal social worker and therapist, Mahlatse Diale, who's joining me today. She works for the Johannesburg Parent and Child Counselling Centre, otherwise known as JPCCC. And they do phenomenal work in counselling anyone and everyone. Am I right? Under the age of 18 is predominantly your field.
Definitely, but we also offer services to adults that come to the center. So most of the young people, we see them at schools and some do come to the center, but we also offer services to just any adult who wants to take care of their mental health.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much for your time today. I know you're hectically busy. I just wanted to start with depression because it is a big talking point at the moment, and I wanted to know if you've seen a rise in depression, or have you seen perhaps a rise? I'm saying since maybe COVID or post-COVID, a rise in people thinking they are depressed but not necessarily depressed.
Okay, thank you again for having me, Cindy. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to think about that. So has there been a rise in depression? Yes, and definitely in teenagers of late. I think with COVID, yes, but also with other issues that teenagers are sort of going through and witnessing. With the rise in social media, there's been an increase in sort of that sense of comparison, wondering if they are in the state that they should be in. Should they have more things? Should they be engaging in more activities? Should they have access to more resources? So those kinds of things are what teenagers are sort of facing, and also starting to realize when they're okay and when they're not okay. So social media has had a big impact.
Because depression is and I mean, you and I know this because we've worked in the space, but depression is something that has to be clinically diagnosed, right? Teenagers will go online and you Google your symptoms and Google goes, you're depressed, and you're not necessarily depressed.
Yes.
You're just having a sad day.
Yes.
So as a parent, how do I know if my child is depressed? Or are they sad? And as a teenager, how do I know if I'm depressed or sad?
Okay, so that's a good question. So everybody experiences a sense of sadness every once in a while. And I think sometimes you can sort of point out why you're feeling sad. Maybe you've had a difficult week, or maybe you've lost a friend, maybe not necessarily to death, but you've lost a friend maybe because you had a
friendship or relationship or
argument, so you'd feel sad, your mood would be a bit low. And I think it needs to be pointed out that generally teenagers are going through a lot of emotional changes in their bodies. Their bodies are changing, and that impacts their mental health, their state of mind. They worry about, how they look, how social media says they should look. Maybe the expectation of what it would be like to go through those changes. So you'll have those normal mood swings that happens. So what is depression then? Depression is extended periods of feeling very sad, losing interest in activities. And usually it would be activities that somebody used to enjoy maybe. And they might lose interest because that feeling doesn't come anymore. So you would feel quite lethargic. You feel very disconnected in a way. Maybe you engage in conversations with people, but something just doesn't feel like it's connecting. You might go to those same activities, but they're not as fun. They're not enjoyable. So you lose interest because things are not enjoyable, and you just feel like sad all the time, or feel disconnected, feel
lonely.
Those lonely feelings, but it becomes very difficult for you to enjoy everyday things, so to speak. So you sort of withdraw, and you as a parent, you'd see your child sort of becoming something that you're not sure. So with normal sadness,
this is a very fine line, because I mean, if I had to think about the amount of time my kids spend in their room alone by themselves, it doesn't necessarily mean they're depressed.
Not necessarily.
So it's very difficult, because they're at that age where they are naturally trying to be individuals and be with their friends. So they go into their rooms and they're on their phones. But how do I then tell the difference or see signs of depression?
So with the normal teenage changes, you'll start noticing that they withdraw more to their room, but maybe they do that to engage with their friends. They'll still, maybe if they're people who are inviting friends over, they'll still invite friends over. They'll still engage in activities that they enjoy. With depression, you'll see a decline in all of those things. So they might withdraw to their rooms, but it might be to be on social media, but not to engage with others. It might be to play games that help them sort of forget about life happening. So it's more about disconnecting from everything, as opposed to connecting in a different way.
So that's if I could maybe try use an example. Let's say my child comes home from school and they go straight to their room, and I say, we're going to visit your gran, and normally they would love that, but now they're like, actually, I just want to stay home by myself.
Yes.
It's fine the first time, but then the second or third time, is that
you start worrying, you start wondering, trying to find out what it is about, those activities. Maybe something wrong happened in that space, and then they might be able to explain it. But if there's nothing really that they can point to, and sometimes that's why a lot of people struggle to sort of express feelings of depression, right? Is because a lot of the times people can't point to a reason. Sometimes you can. There is situational depression where you lose somebody due to death, you witness an accident, and that brings about anxiety and depression. That's one way you can point it out, and everybody around you will understand that you're going through depression, and there is an answer to because. But with a lot of young people, you find that everything in their lives has sort of continued in the way that it used to be. It's their feelings that have changed.
That's so interesting, because somebody once explained it to me, we talk about mental health, and people think that good mental health, sometimes it's not, you walk into Typo and you see a whole lot of motivational quotes, on a whole lot of bags and pencils and stuff. And you're like, oh, I'm going to buy this and I'm just going to feel better. That's good mental health. That's not good mental health. Somebody explained it to me that good mental health is having the right emotion in the right situation. So if your teenager has had a fight with a friend, or they're failing to connect with their friend group, or they lost a pet or whatever, and they are sad or angry, they are entitled to feel that in the moment.
Definitely.
If something traumatic happens in your teenager's life, a dog dies or something, or they fail, etc., and they're okay with it and blasé and like, life carries on.
Yes, that's also
you got to watch that as well,
concern.
right? So it's so difficult being like a parent, and especially in this day and age, like you say, there's so much stuff on social media telling them that they are depressed.
Yes,
and they might not be depressed, because also you go onto your TikTok, Instagram, whatever, and if you click on one depression post and you like it, it's going to keep curating depression for you, right? It's going to be very hard to get out of that cycle.
Yeah. So I think we need to look at it in two ways. It can be beneficial, and obviously there's a fine line where it can start becoming very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So I think that the fact that on social media, people are talking about mental health and depression, and children are able to start comparing and thinking about their own feelings and thinking that they might be depressed, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because they're exploring, they're trying to understand their feelings in comparison to what's going on online.
So there might be something online that has all the symptoms, and I go check. Actually, I think I might be depressed, as opposed to never seeing anything, and then you don't know that that's what that is.
Yes, definitely. Okay. So in that way, that can be good, because then it opens up the space for somebody to say, I'm actually going through this. I didn't know it was depression, or I didn't realize that what I'm going through has a name, so to speak. And so they can get help. So that's the positive side. The problem comes in when it's just a thing to sort of connect with on social media, and we're not getting help, and we're not reaching out for help. Because even if it isn't necessarily depression, maybe it's just feelings of anxiety or sadness, and maybe around a certain issue, which can happen. When somebody gets help, it's always helpful.
Yeah.
It's always helpful because they can navigate whatever it is that they're going through. Maybe they're highly stressed. Maybe they're finding it high pressure to perform at school. Maybe they start worrying about their futures, if they're going to do well or not. So thinking and starting to worry and then getting help, that's the positive aspect of, social media, speaking about it. But if it just becomes something that a child sort of gets obsessed with but doesn't get help or doesn't speak about what they are seeing and experiencing, that can be negative because there are other things, suicidal ideation, it being idealized, all of those things that
glamorized. They're actually like
a negative impact.
Being depressed or being traumatized has actually almost become glamorized now these days. The kids throw those terms around because people have given it labels, but they don't realize the seriousness of that label. So you touched on getting help. So if my child comes to me and they say, I think I'm depressed, or I am depressed, or I start to see that my child is depressed.
Yes.
What do I do? Because we do live in a society where culturally depression doesn't exist for some. They say, oh, just walk it off, shake it off. Like I think if I had gone to my parents when I was a teenager and gone, I'm depressed, they would have been like,
what
seriously,
do you have
let's
to
go
be
get ice cream.
About?
Yeah, exactly. Let's go get an ice cream. So what what do we do as parents if my child comes to me and says, I'm depressed?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think the truth is it can be quite alarming. You can be very worried when your child says something like that. So I think it's important for parents to note that it's a hard thing to hear.
It is.
And a lot of the time, parents maybe respond out of fear or out of just that feeling of wanting to get away from their child really experiencing this thing, or fear that, this is going to be their whole world, their whole lives. So I think parents need to acknowledge their fears, but I think what is important is to listen. If your child is coming to you and saying, this is what I'm experiencing, listen, try and say, okay, let's have a chat about what's been going on, ask questions. And when I say listen, just put everything away.
Yeah.
I think as parents, we tend to be distracted, whether it be about work or whatever else that's happening in our own lives as parents, or, as parents, maybe you have other children, there's always something happening. So I think it's important to slow down and to just listen, have a chat with your child, listen to what they have to say, speak to them, and normalize it. Say, it's very normal to experience difficulty, because I think sometimes you can give an impression that everything has to be great all the time.
That's true.
And that's not real.
I think because, that saying, and we often say it as parents, you're only as happy as your saddest child, right? And so you don't want your children to be sad, because if they are sad, you sit there with them, because it's so hard to not feel what they are going through. But you're so right that life is about being happy and being sad at the same time, right? Yes. Because the two can't exist without each other, because how would you know happiness if you didn't know sadness?
Exactly.
Okay, so I think it's very difficult to almost then not react.
Yes.
Because as parents, we just want to protect our children.
Yes.
And we want them to be happy. So if my child's, it would be very hard to not be shocked if your child comes to you and says...
And maybe acknowledge that, okay, what you're saying to me is shocking. I didn't expect that.
Or I could see that you were going through it. I'm so glad you came to me.
Yes, and show them that you're happy that they've spoken up, because sometimes that build up to actually speaking to you has been maybe very difficult. Yeah, because they don't know how you're going to react, if you'll listen to them, if you will dismiss them, if you will make it, something that's not real in their minds, because sometimes they're also asking questions, right? They're not sure.
And they wait to see your reaction to their...
Yes. So how you react and respond is very important, to listen, but to also be honest about, because if you're shocked, it's okay to say, I'm feeling quite shocked that you said this to me. Speak about what you've noticed, ask them questions. Is there anything that has happened that makes you feel like that's how you're feeling? And it's okay if they can't point it out. And that's also a very big indicator that I'm just feeling sad and I don't know why.
And Then what's the next step? Should I be asking them what do they want to do with this? Or should I, as a concerned parent, take my own steps?
Okay. So as a parent, I think you can do your own research, find out what steps to take. Obviously, there are spaces where you can take your child for therapy, explore with them, what has been helpful in dealing with their stress, if they're feeling more stressed. Just have that conversation and then suggest, right? Let it be a collaboration in terms of the steps that you're going to take. If in that moment you probably are not sure, you can say, okay, I'm going to look up some places that may be helpful, and then we'll discuss them. Sometimes your child, maybe at school, they've had a discussion and they know they can say to you, can I go see a therapist? Okay. Or, so listen to those things and then maybe just, accept. If you're concerned, you can meet with the therapist or counselors. A lot of schools around Johannesburg do have counselors, some in-house. Some of them, they do get counselors to come into the school every once in a while. And there are places around Johannesburg. There is offers for online, telephonic counseling. Some services are free and some are at a cost. So it's just looking around what works best for you and your family.
So let's say, okay, my child comes to me. Do I need to act immediately? In what situation do I need to actually get them help? Because now, what if my child comes to me, I'm depressed, and I leave it for 2 weeks, and then they commit suicide?
Yes. So definitely check where your child is at. If they're just saying, I'm just depressed, I feel sad all the time, it's important to act and to find out where they can get help and support, and to sort of maybe also inquire for them, how can I help? Or, can I do this and this? And maybe suggest, because the other thing about somebody who's going through depression, they don't always have agency to say, this is what I need. And I think that's an important aspect, because sometimes it can be overwhelming for somebody who's depressed to be asked, what can I do? Okay. Because now you're already almost asking them to sort of give you answers. And sometimes they don't even have those answers. So maybe offer and say, can I do this? Yeah. Will this be helpful?
Find out. It doesn't really work to say to them, okay, what do you need? Yeah. Like sometimes, because they've come to you and said, I need help. Yes. Now you almost have to.
They're feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling depressed. And depending on the situation, somebody might say, maybe I want to just sleep. Can you just let me sleep, or whatever it is? But weigh in if that's helpful. If they're just sleeping all the time, is it helpful in the long run? So sometimes, yes, they can rest and sleep, and then ensure that there are certain activities that they can do. Make sure that they get space to go out as well. So put those things in place as well. Are they isolated? What are other factors happening around the home that could be affecting them? Has there been, fights between the parents? Has there been a lot of fights between mom and dad? Has there been fights between you and your child that may be compounding whatever is happening? So also look at that and then start thinking around, okay, I've been putting a lot of pressure on you to perform at school. Maybe that has, sort of hurt you and weighed you down. Can we have that conversation? And then think about other things that you can do. Get therapy. If you're noticing that your child might be very low,
like suicidal,
and you worry about the suicidal ideation, you need to act immediately. So and as you're having that conversation, so you can call SADC. You can go into any hospital. Most government hospitals have a crisis. What's the emergency room? You can take your child there and say, our child is experiencing depression and I'm worried that they might be suicidal. So depending on what your child says, if they say, I am suicidal, you can take them there. Some places would want a referral. So you can maybe call in SADC and ask them to speak to your child and then do a referral.
You could go to your doctor?
You can go to your doctor. For those that have medical aid, sometimes they do an assessment and then they can recommend medication. Sometimes they will recommend therapy. But I highly, encourage acting immediately.
If it's a suicidal
ideation, you do not necessarily know what's causing it, or whether your child has a plan. You can find out. You can ask if you've really thought of ending your life. They might say no. Some children might actually say to you, yes, I've thought of dying, or I think of dying, but I haven't made a plan. So those are indications that their depression is quite severe. and they need somebody to sort of assess where they're at and recommend an action plan.
And how important is it in that moment, if your child has depression, to not make it about you, because straight away you're like, my child's depressed. It must have been something I did. It was this because I parented them like that. It was because I didn't breastfeed them. It was, all the self-blame that you could possibly go through, because in that moment, it's not about you.
Yeah,
anymore.
it's not very helpful because then you're diverting the attention from the one who really needs it. They're needing help, they're needing support, and you making it about you is actually going to exacerbate the issue, because it will also make them feel worse. Maybe I did this and this, I didn't, love you enough, whatever it is that you might be feeling as a parent. How's that child then going to feel? Because depression tells you nobody cares. Depression can make one feel like, they're a burden. They make everybody's life difficult. And when you make it about you, or you sort of self-blame, it's almost like you're compounding on that feeling of, I'm a burden.
Yeah. Like, what will everybody think? What is your grandmother going to think if you come to me and you tell me that you're depressed, right?
Yes. So allow your child to be at the center and normalize the fact that they need help. That mental health is, it's a normal thing. And, everybody goes through difficulties, and some people, struggle more. I just wanted to add, there are certain things that it's important to look out for in terms of, whether your child might really be going through depression, and it's life experiences. If your child has gone through abuse, whether it be mental, sexual, physical, they are highly likely to experience, depression in their teens. Okay,
because I was going to say, are some kids more
prone?
Prone. That's the word.
Risk.
Thank you.
There are. So stuff like that, experiencing trauma. If you've gone through a divorce as parents and your children witness that, some of the divorce, processes can be quite hectic. Parents are fighting all the time, custody battles. That impact on children's mental health. And a lot of the time you start seeing it later on as they go into their teenage phases, trying to figure out who they are, having, that space of exploring their own sense of identity. And all of those things can compound on them. Children that haven't, met one or the other parent, maybe they've lost a mom or they've lost a dad, or they've never known a mom or a dad. Children that have only been raised by grandparents, they're also quite at high risk to sort of experience depression, because it's something that speaks about their sense of identity. Who cares and about me? Who loves me? Who chooses to be around me? The sense of rejection. And trauma, witnessing a hijacking or being part of a hijacking, all of those things. So think about, what has my child experienced in their life that might add to sort of them being, experiencing depression. And other things can be genetic.
Can depression be genetic?
Yeah. And so if somebody in the family has experienced mental health issues, it increases the chances that, other people in the family will also experience mental health issues. So depression is one of those.
But at the same time, we don't want parents to panic now and say, okay, so because I had depression, and then your child comes home and they're sad, and you're like, that's it, they're depressed. Like, let's all be rational about it. I think the fact that if you're a parent listening to this podcast, I need to remind you that if you have downloaded this podcast and you're listening to it, it means you're already a good parent, because you're already trying to do the work to help your kid.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. So what's the youngest you could possibly diagnose somebody with depression? Because I would imagine it's quite difficult, because kids by nature, you just don't know if it's their personality or if it is something.
When it comes to diagnosis, I think it's very difficult to say, because as a social worker, I don't diagnose.
Okay. But
we've seen children young and younger experiencing, bouts of depression.
Okay. So it's
8-year-olds can go through feelings of depression, depending on what's going on in the environment. When we speak about mental health, we speak about the first 1,000 days as being important around attachment, because what happens in the life of a young person, during that time impacts on their mental health. So, for example, if a child has been abandoned
like
during
in the
that
first
time,
3 to 4 years of their life.
Yes, and if maybe a parent was going through depression, postnatal depression, all of those impact on attachment and how the child feels in terms of connecting with their primary caregiver. So all of those things also can impact the child later on in life. So it's just to note it, to be aware.
Don't fixate on it.
Don't fixate.
Don't stress about it.
Be aware so that when your child is needing that support, you don't feel like it needs to be dismissed. You acknowledge it and you say, okay, let's do something about it.
And then I just wanted to know, is because people will be like, my child's depressed, that's it forever. Is depression for life?
Definitely, that's a good question. So depression is a mental health condition. So it being diagnosed is a good thing. And yes, somebody who struggles with depression might struggle again later on in life. However, it is possible that they go for help, they get treatment, and during therapy, they learn the skills that they need to cope so that later on in life, they don't necessarily go through the depression again.
Or they feel it coming on and they can go, oh, I remember this from the last time. This is what I need to do.
Yes. Okay. I was just about to say that, to say later on in life, even if it does come through, because they've gotten help, they've gotten support, then they know how to sort of address it and deal with it. It's not, the end all of things, and it doesn't mean they can't get better. It is treatable. And I think that's important to note.
And I think it's important to let people know that there is help.
Yes.
There is help. And there's not this thing that you have to worry about and have the stigma about and be like, oh, my child's depressed. And then, hush, hush, because you'll actually possibly be surprised.
Yes.
When you start talking to other parents, how similar some people's stories are.
Definitely. There's so many things that are impacting on young people that maybe our generation wasn't exposed to. Like we said, social media, and different changes in community. Community a few years ago and what it is now is very different. So there are a lot of challenges that young people are going through, that a generation of their parents and the generation of their grandparents weren't exposed to. So there are other factors, factors that children are now worried about. They're privy to socioeconomic issues that their parents are going through. They're privy to so many other things that are happening in their parents' lives, and in the world at large.
Then you touched on community there, which I think is quite important. If my child is depressed, how do I as a parent get support? Okay. Because I also don't want to make it this big thing now. Like my child's depressed, now they come home every day from school, every day. How are you? Because I'm sure that's going to weigh them down as well, right?
So I think normalize it. I think the other thing about depression is just people not wanting it to their whole lives to then be about that.
To label, to have that label.
I have a label, I'm depressed, but I don't want to live every day with that. Depressed. I want to be able to be greeted and say, hi, how are you doing?
Yes.
Not because, how are you doing because you're depressed.
Okay. So how are you?
So how are you today? How was your day?
Yeah.
Engage with them in a normal way. Allow yourself to spend extra time, even if you didn't in the past. Allow yourself to spend extra time because they're important. Yeah. There's nothing that helps depression more than just knowing that you are valuable.
Okay.
Because the thing about depression is a lot of people start feeling like they are burdens, as we've spoken. They're not valuable. Nobody cares about them. And yes, there's that sense of isolation. People isolate themselves, whether because it's hard to engage in conversations, but being able to know that people care and they want to be around you, that changes things. It changes the mental conversation that's happening in one's mind. As I saw a post on social media, and it was about Winnie the Pooh, and it showed Eeyore, and on it says Eeyore was always depressed, and they always spent time with him, invited him to things, even though they knew he wasn't necessarily gonna bring this big energy, but they cared and they wanted to involve him. So I think, as parents, think Eeyore. Think if my child is going through depression, they want to still engage in things. They want to be cared about. They might not necessarily be able to do it themselves. They can't engage. They're not going to ask you to go out or do things. But, it's probably going to be important that you want to spend time with them. Even if it's having an ice cream session in their room, whatever it is, just that engagement, maybe finding out if they're friends who want to come over and just visit with them. They might not be like, hi, I'm happy, I'm excited, but just having, a sense of community, certain things that you do, and sometimes encouraging it, even if it's difficult, just for that day.
So how do I start the conversation with my child if I think my child's depressed? Because you also don't want to like, hey, how things going? Nothing's wrong. Okay. So how do I
think you can just have that conversation and say, I've noticed 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm just feeling a little bit concerned. How are you doing? What's going on?
Fine.
Okay, you're fine.
I'm fine.
Okay. So I think it's important to also note those kinds of responses.
Okay.
And just think about what they might mean.
Yeah.
Right? Note how your child is responding. Maybe invite them to do something. If they don't want to talk, you can just say, I can see you don't really want to talk about it. Can we do 1, 2, 3 over the weekend? Because sometimes if a child is not ready to go there, it can be really, really very difficult to push them to that state where they're saying, just say, I'm here for you. I'm really concerned.
Just plant the seed.
If you need to talk, is there somebody you want to talk to? Are there friends that you enjoy spending? So find things that maybe that will engage them. I was just thinking earlier on that a lot of young people, they're always on their phone.
Yeah. But I'm also always on mine, so I can't even get cross with my kids because I do it.
They're always on their phone. Send that message to just show that you're thinking about
like
them.
WhatsApp them.
And checking in on them. And sometimes it might be easier for them to respond there.
Yeah.
Just saying, how are you today?
Yeah.
I was just thinking of you, I left this and this, on their phone. And allow that to be a space to sort of engage them and then bring them back to engage on a personal level, because that's another aspect. Children don't know how to socialize, on a face-to-face. You see people, they'll sit in a room and they're all on their phones. They're with each other.
You are right.
And you wonder what that's about. So there's that sense of difficulty engaging in personal conversation. So your child saying, I'm fine, nothing's wrong. It might be that. It might be that it's very difficult to sort of engage with you directly. So
also, I think if you we always make there's this kind of this move where people are trying to make social media like the devil, but at the same time it actually can also be a space to connect with your child.
Yes.
If you can see what they are reposting or posting or liking, on their socials, you get a sense of where their mind space is, right? So like sometimes I'll send my kids funny Instagrams or funny TikToks or whatever, because and then they reply with something they find funny, and then you start to build this like like they'll send me TikToks of like the mom on the trip, and then it'll be like the mother like freaking out and packing for everybody, and then you get to understand that that's how they are seeing you.
Yes.
And I think if you have a good relationship with your kid and you start to develop that, if you started to see that they were in a depression, you could send them a little note about depression and see possibly how they respond or react to it.
Yes. So engage with them in that level and also try and bring them back also to that. I think face-to-face connections make a huge difference.
Huge.
But allow yourself to also meet them where they're at.
Connect on their level.
Connect with them on their level.
I could sit here and talk to you all day. You are just dynamic, and I love the work you're doing. And I just wanted to know if there's any, we've touched on a lot, but is there anything that's key points for parents? Like don't stress. I feel like I want to say don't stress if your child is sad. It could just be sad, but do take note of their personalities. And I think it's difficult, I must be honest, as a parent, because they do go quieter and they don't come to you with everything. And so you could go, my child's depressed, and they're not necessarily. It's like, it's not easy. Mahlatse is what I'm trying to say. This is parenting is hard.
I'd like to say it's going to be okay. I think it's important to note that our children are going through a lot of challenges that, that is new to all of us.
All of us.
It's new to them, but it's also new to parents. It's a space where not every parent can navigate and say, okay, when it comes to social media, here's the do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
I mean, there is help. There are support groups out there. There is information on how to stay safe on social media. But a lot of these things around social media, they're new for both the parents and the young people. And parents are navigating it together with their children. I think it's important to talk to your children around emotions. That we, as you said, we experience both good and not so good emotions. We feel sad, we feel angry, we feel excited, we feel disappointed. And being able to accept those different emotions depending on what the situation is, and being able to be okay with the fact that I'm sad today because 1, 2, 3 happened.
And not tell your child how they should feel.
And
right?
yeah, and
so if
not
your child drops
it.
their ice cream and they go, I'm totally sad, you'd be like, oh, well, harden up.
Yes.
Just gotta go, I'm sorry you're sad.
Yeah, like,
move forward.
It's
you
sad,
know, like,
that's
together.
very disappointing.
Yeah.
You're disappointed. And children knowing that that's okay to sort of experience the disappointments, and that disappointments do happen.
Yeah.
That's an important aspect of navigating mental health.
Yeah.
Being able to deal with issues as they come and address them. If we're happy, yay, that's great. But if we're sad, that's also okay too.
I think raising teenagers forces us to look inside a lot, hey? Because your child comes to you and they're like, this is how I feel. And you actually have to listen and not just be like, well, I don't do feelings.
Yeah.
You know, some parents, I don't do feelings. Oh, that's touchy-feely stuff. No, embrace it.
Yeah, embrace it and say that it's hard for me. If it's hard, say emotions or feelings are hard for me, but I don't want them to be hard for you. I want you to experience life differently. I want you to have skills that maybe I didn't have, or I want to learn certain skills together with you. So I think it's going to be okay. There are resources out there to help. I don't know if I need to sort of say some of the...
No, don't stress. We'll wrap it up at the end.
That people can get help. There is private and government resources that are available. There is online. They're free telephone spaces that you can call. So there is support. And I think it's important to not have stigma, to allow ourselves to know that some of our ideas around mental health, they're not necessarily accurate, and to allow ourselves to sort of change our minds around that.
And I think as scary as it is for parents to be navigating during this time, I think it's also a wonderful time to be a parent, because the village has gotten bigger and we're all connecting, and it's, we're all in the same space. Do the cameramen have any questions? Okay, here we go. Cameraman's got a question.
What would you say to a kid who is in a position where they can't talk to? I mean, you did touch on the fact that like parents or adults will make it about themselves. So what happens to the kid who knows that that's the same response they're gonna get?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so just so that we can get it on the microphone, the question is, what do you say to a child who feels like they can't approach the parent about how they feel about depression, because the parent is going to make it about them?
Okay, excellent question.
Great question.
So, social media, check for spaces that speak around mental health, how to get help for mental health. So I think some of the places we're going to line up.
Okay, let's say them. SADAG is a good one.
South
African Depression and Anxiety Group.
You've got Lifeline. You can call Lifeline. I work for Johannesburg Parent and Child Counselling Center, so you can find us online. Those spaces you spoke about on Facebook, a lot of the times when there's talks around mental health, there are places that work with mental health that one can approach. I say find an adult that you can trust. Sometimes it's easier to speak to maybe, for example, a teacher or a coach or whoever.
An uncle and aunt.
Yes, an uncle and aunt. So try and find an adult that you can trust, that you can say, this is what I'm experiencing. Hopefully, those people can link you to the correct resources. But if not, I want people to use those phones for good.
Yeah.
To access those resources to say, if I can call Lifeline or SADAG and speak to somebody. And that's a trend to get the help. And I know that there's some, children that know that their parents have stigma around mental health, and they will say, you don't need all of that. It's also for those children, so that you can sort of access those help without having to wait for your parents to do that. We do engage in our work, we do engage with parents as well. But we do not deny access to resources because parents don't give permission. Yeah.
And I think it's very important to tell the child that when they go to their one trusted adult, that they explain to the adult that they've come to that person in confidence because they can't go to their parents.
Yeah.
And I think any adult, if a child came to you and said, this is how I'm feeling, but I can't go to my parents, I don't believe there's an adult who would ignore you or not hold space for you or try get you the help that you need.
Yeah, I think it can be difficult depending on who you are speaking to.
So that's why it's very brave. As soon as a child comes to you, you must know how brave they were to come and tell you that that's how they're feeling.
Because, for example, sometimes with teachers, they have a responsibility to sort of contact, the parents. So it's allowing children and having that honest conversation to say, thank you for telling me this. We'll arrange help for you. However, I need to sort of tell your parents. And for children, it's important to know that the professionals that come in, they know how to work with your parents. Yeah. They are trained to sort of have those kind of conversation. It might be difficult for you and you might worry about the ramifications that may come. But our job is to ensure your protection and your safety. So even if parents are involved, because in some cases we have to involve parents.
Well, I think let's highlight the cases you'd have to involve parents. It's only if the child's got suicidal, suicide ideation, if they're going to harm somebody else or harm themselves. So if a child comes to you and said, I'm so depressed, but I'm going to kill my dad.
Yeah.
That's when you get involved. Or if there's abuse.
Yes.
I think those are the only three instances.
Those are the main three instances where it definitely has to be disclosed. So in some cases, yes, parents will be involved, but in some cases they might not. I just want children to be aware that sometimes their parents will still be involved, but there's no need to fear because those people know how to work with parents. Yeah. And our job is to ensure and help parents to be supportive as opposed to, adding to their problems.
Yeah.
And it's affair. Some parents are very difficult to work with.
Because your child's depression, a lot of parents can't, it's hard not to take it personally if your child is depressed because of you and your house and your upbringing. Yeah. But then we are the adults and they are the child. Yes. We can't turn around and say to them, what do you mean? Like they're telling you how they see it. They're giving you their lived experience. You actually have to be mature.
Yeah, definitely. I think our job is to create safety for children and protect them and to help the caregivers to also do the same. Yeah.
How do you navigate it with parents who just can't see it? Who just, refuse to believe that it's them? Because that's a very good point. There are kids out there who do go get the help and then the feedback comes to the parents and the parents then take it out on the kids because the kids are they're like, how dare you? Go and do that, how dare you go get help? What do you mean? What is that saying about us and our family? And what do you mean you're depressed?
Definitely. And that's a fair point.
It's hard.
We work a lot with young people and that does come across. And so our job is to try and help the young people. I think the important aspect is that they get help.
First.
That's the most important part, is that the young person gets help for themselves and learns the skills that they need to sort of navigate life and to process whatever it is that they've experienced, whether from their parents or any other life issues and other concerns that might be happening. And to continue with therapy, even if parents are not necessarily receptive, and to sort of understand that, chances are, because of how the parents are, that sort of some of the aspects that sort of led this child to being in need for that kind of help and support. We can't always change parents.
I know.
But hopefully that's the process of them also getting their own help.
Yeah.
We try and involve parents, and because if we are helping a child but they go back to that same environment that is impacting on them negatively, it can be very painful and it's hard. So we try and involve parents because we also want to change the environment and create a different space for the child when they go back home.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times the reason for involving parents is because of that. So that can be challenging, but I encourage children to still get help online, whichever way they can, even if the parents maybe...
Even if you tell a friend's parent.
Yes. Maybe
you said
not necessarily supportive to that space, and hopefully there will be help for your parents as well to be supported so that they can support you. And sometimes it's not always the case.
Yeah.
But to get help and to know that the help that you're getting for yourself is going to help you and improve your mental health moving forward as you grow and develop.
Thank you. I think that's it for today.
Thank you, Cindy.
I could have spoken to you all day, Mahlatse. So reminder to anyone who's listening, if you are struggling with depression or if you do feel like you need to reach out to somebody, you can contact SADAG, South African Depression and Anxiety Group. You can also contact Lifeline, book an appointment there. And if you're under 18, contact JPCCC, which is the Johannesburg Parent and Child Counselling Centre. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Until we meet again, take care.